Would you go to the first screen, first picture here? A little trivia for you today. Just see how much you're up on television here. Does anybody want to raise your hand and tell me who this is? I mean, I'll be very, very impressed. Anybody, you guys can't see it in the choir, so you're stuck. All right. This is from a drama in England on British television called The EastEnders. And The EastEnders actually had two different parts and two different series to it. The original drama began in the 1950s. This is one of the oldest running television shows in television history. Happens to be a British drama, and I didn't expect anybody to know it. All right, and I'm going to explain more about it in a second. But it is a very, very popular television show in Britain called The EastEnders. It has to do with a group or a family that lives in the East End of London. East End is considered the working class part of London, as opposed to the West End, which is where the more posh people live, etc. It's called the EastEnders. Go to the next slide, though. Now, this one might be a little bit more familiar if you remember, some of you. Okay. Anyone want to take a stab at this one? A little interactive Sunday here. What's that? Any guesses? Okay. This is from the famous soap opera As the World Turns. Okay. Which also began, all right, in the 1950s, and it ran for a long time. I'm not sure if it's still running now, but ran forever, okay? And what I want to draw your attention to is the notion of a soap opera. Now, many people don't understand this, or even know this, where this came from. The phrase soap opera is a reference to afternoon dramas that began in the 1950s. It got the term soap opera because a major sponsor of these televisions were soap companies, specifically laundry detergent. Now, this happened to be the 1950s, and the belief was that the people watching afternoon dramas would be housewives at home who do what? In their minds, it was do the cleaning, do the washing, doing all of the things that a housewife would do. And so therefore, the marketers of this drama said, well, let's sell to these women. All right, and so the soap companies are the ones who sponsored these dramas. That's where you get the phrase, a soap opera. All right, and that's where that eventually comes from. But I'm much more interested in, if you have ever watched a soap opera, I'm much more interested in the dynamic of individuals who actually get wrapped up in these shows. And my point of showing these old photos was in Britain and in the United States, and the truth is that actually when I lived in Britain, sometimes they actually showed Australian soap operas too, and those were also long-running series from way back when they started and began, and they follow families all the way through. And the amazing thing is if you've ever watched a soap opera, the question has to come back to you, why? Why am I watching this soap opera? What is it that has to do with the price of tea? Who cares? I mean, and the thing about soap operas is they are full of the most ridiculous drama storylines you've ever heard in your life. I mean, that's the nature of a soap opera, right? I mean, suddenly you have a twin who comes back, somebody dies, a character dies off, and the twin comes back, and you've got an extra character, and somebody kills somebody, but then they come back to life, or there's a flashback, and they tell whole seasons sometimes in flashback mode. I mean, they're the most ridiculous dramas you probably ever watched, and they're almost incredible in their storyline, almost incredible in their drama. But the thing is if they're incredible, and they don't make any sense sometimes, and they're ridiculous by their very nature, why would shows like this, As the World Turns, or The EastEnders, or some of the others, why have they lasted on television for 50 years? What is it about these shows that says, well, this is ridiculous, but man, they get a big audience. People tune in, and I have known people who say, from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock, I'm not going anywhere else. I'm going to sit down and watch these soap operas. Now, it's a little bit different with DVRs today. You can record them, but I know fans of shows who said, I'm not missing. And of course, it's one thing to talk about afternoon soap operas. It's another thing to think about some of our evening soap operas. I was a major fan, a big fan of the show ER. ER in the 1990s into the early 2000s was a great drama. And if you followed that show from its inception, the mid-90s, all the way through its run of 10 years or so, by the time you got to the end of 10 years, there weren't even the same characters anymore. They had all the stars had left, and they had new lines of storylines, etc. But nevertheless, man, I was a devout follower of that show. And again, I raise the question, What does this have to do with anything? Why are we so enamored in our culture with this form of entertainment, with the soap opera? And then I read this passage from Scripture. I read this passage from 1 Samuel. And if you really dig deep into the story of David, it is a soap opera. I mean, it is all of the drama that you would expect from a soap opera. It seems to be ridiculous on its face. Look at the story. I hope you were paying attention to this. King Saul has been king of Israel. He has this boy, David, come up and become popular in his midst. This boy, David, kills a Goliath, this shepherd boy. That's pretty incredible. I mean, that's an incredible storyline. We're familiar with the story of David and Goliath, but it gets even deeper. Saul becomes jealous of David and starts to figure out ways to have him killed. The first thing Saul does is say, I'm going to send this young boy out and fight in the wars. And hopefully he'll get killed by the Philistines in these battles. But instead, David is so gifted as a soldier, he wins the victories and becomes even more popular. So Saul says, I'm going to have to figure out a way to have this guy killed. So he goes to his family, he goes to Jonathan, who's his son, and he goes to his close confidants and he says, we got to kill David. And then in this, Jonathan says, don't kill David. He's my best friend. And Saul says, okay, I won't kill him. And then, almost the way it reads, the next day Saul says, no, I want to kill David, and tries to kill him in his own room with a spear, and David eludes him and goes away. Then Saul goes to his daughter, who happens to be David's wife, all right, and he says, essentially, I want your help in killing David. Jonathan warns David, and David says, I've got to escape. I've got soldiers outside the door from Saul who are going to kill me. And I know I'm exaggerating all this for a purpose. All right? So Michelle says, well, I'm going to help you escape. So he lets David out through a window. And what does Michelle do to protect David? She goes and gets an idol, lays it in the bed, puts hair on the head of the idol to make it look like David's asleep in the bed. All right? And then when the soldiers come in, she says, oh, he's ill, he's sick in bed. And they all kind of look around and they go, oh, okay, well, he's sick in bed. They go back to Saul and they say he's sick. And then he said, well, go back and try to kill him anyway. So they go back and they find the idol laying in the bed. All right? And I say all of this in an exaggerated way, and if you're confused, you should be, because this is a soap opera. I mean, this is drama at the highest level. And again, I go back to, why? Why can't we just simply say David was a virtuous man and he ruled over Israel, all right, and he eventually eliminates Saul as this greedy, selfish, vain king? The story doesn't say it that way. He lists out the drama. He kind of captures you in the drama, and it's almost incredulous. I mean, come on, we have daughter-in-laws, and we have wives, and we have people conniving, we have friends, we have friendship, we have people that are jealous, we have people trying to murder each other, we have battles, we have wars, we have little boys killing giants. What is all of this stuff? What does it mean? Why are we so enraptured with it in many ways? And I looked at this, and I could only come to the conclusion, the reality is that we are human beings of relationship, and what relationship does not have its drama? What relationship does not have its mystery and its incredulous moments? What relationship is not full of intrigue? If it's really worth a friendship, if it's really worth a loving relationship, we as human beings actually are creatures of drama. And I think we are so gravitate towards these soap operas and gravitate towards things like ER and television shows and storylines, and we get enraptured in them because it speaks to us as human beings. And here, in this story of David, we can relate to some of this drama because David is a human being. Saul is a human being. And in these stories are little elements, little pictures of what it means to be a human being. And we get so caught up in this drama, and we're so attracted to this drama because the truth is life itself, in many ways, is a drama. And I don't mean that in a trivial way. What I mean is there's a reality to our lives. There are circumstances that do not make sense. There are things that happen that do not make sense. And when people become jealous, like Saul, when people become vain, like Saul, and when they start to look at the Davids of this world, who are virtuous, who are noble, who are full of integrity, then drama starts to happen. And that storyline is something that always resonates with us. I tell my history students, I say, what is the value of history? I mean, what do we study history for? It's one of the greatest questions. I happen to be in a profession where we're constantly justifying our existence. What do we need to learn history for? I mean, what is it? And of course at Millikan, everybody's required to take a history course. I have to sit there and justify why they're taking a history course. If somebody's going to go off to be an engineer, what are they learning about Charlemagne in 800 for? Why are they doing this? And I say it's less about the details. It's more about the reality and the story of humanity. In those stories, in those narratives, in those powerful narratives of history, we learn how to think like human beings. We learn what drives the passions of individuals. And hopefully you'll learn something about yourself in those narratives. And that is true with this story. In the story of David, it's not just about what God did in the nation of Israel. In this soap opera, in this drama, there are elements of what it means to be a human being. And if we'll focus on those, then we can understand why it's okay to be enraptured with the drama. It's okay to fall in love with the narrative because we're learning something about ourselves as human beings. And in this particular case, what is it that saves David? What is it that in essence saves the nation of Israel? The king has been overcome with jealousy and vanity. And God in his justice could have very easily have said, that's it, I'm done with you. God could have said, he could have done anything he wanted to do to Saul. Instead, he lets the drama play out. Because in the drama, we see some incredible realities. Not just, women taking and putting idols in beds and covering them up, making people think that he's asleep. And we don't just see, Saul trying to kill David with a spear and David obviously being athletic enough to get away from him. We see more than just that. We see the realities of being a human being. And in this case, the reality that is most important is the reality of friendship and devotion. In this story, Saul is intent upon killing David. He's just simply have him executed. Saul is going to go out and he tells his soldiers, go find him and kill him right now. And Jonathan pleads with Saul. And Jonathan says, don't do this. David is a man of integrity. He is a man full of life. Don't do this. And he makes Saul eventually swear that he won't try to harm him. Now Saul changes his mind later on. It says, a powerful evil spirit comes upon Saul, and he has to change. Saul changes. And of course that evil spirit comes from the vanity and jealous. When we are vain and jealous, when we give ourselves over to those kind of desires, when we are that selfish, then an evil spirit is welcome in our lives as well. That's a truth that we need to learn from this drama. But even more so, what saves David the second time? His wife, Michal, has fallen truly in love with David. Now remember, Michal is Saul's daughter. So David is Saul's son-in-law. Michal is supposed to be loyal to the king. In this case, she's more loyal to her husband. And she helps David escape. The devotion she has as a wife is pure, but even more so, the devotion she has to David as a person of integrity is pure as well. And so again, what do we learn here? It is that devotion and friendship to people of integrity, to people of a noble spirit, those relationships are far more powerful than the evil spirits of this world. That is an incredible reality. It almost seems incredulous because if you look around you, if you look at the world, it seems that almost always evil has its way. When we look at the sicknesses, when we look at the cancers, when we look at the evils of this world, when we look at the things that have happened to some of the times our friends and our loved ones, we think evil has its day. But we have to change our perspective and look at how God is working in the circumstances and sometimes in the drama of this world to bring us hope and to bring us encouragement and to tell us that He's the God of eternity, not the God of this temporal world. That is a truth that we can learn from this passage, from the story in the life of David, that we can draw hope from. When we look at the evil spirits of this world, we don't have to know that they're going to be victorious because in reality, in eternity, they're not going to be victorious. God is going to win. God is going to have His way, and if He has to do it through the drama of being a human being, if He has to do it through friendship and devotion, He will do it. If He has to do it by escaping through a window in the middle of the night, then that's what it takes. And God is going to pursue us with reckless abandon. And God is going to use the circumstances that exist from our own foibles and use those to his advantage. That is an incredible reality that we can learn from the soap opera of this story. But there's even more to it than just that. And that is, where are we putting our hope? Are we putting our hope in our own skills and talents? Because David is an individual of skills and talents. David is incredible. I mean, he has the wisdom to take on a giant and defeat them. He has the wisdom to lead men in battle and be incredibly successful. He has the wisdom to ultimately be a Renaissance man. It means he does everything well. If you read these stories, he plays the harp, he serves the king, he's a general in battle. I mean, he's very wise with his father, he's a man of integrity and full of devotion, all of those things. David is incredibly talented, but in this case, what saves him? What saves him is the pleading of his friend Jonathan and the pleading of his wife Michal and the wisdom of Michal. All of those things come together. And so in this case, we learn that we rely upon the people that God has put in our lives to help us and encourage us. There is much to be learned from the drama and the narrative of Scripture. Even more so, there's much to be learned from the drama and narrative of our lives. And we should find hope in that. Because each and every one of us, at some point in time in our lives, sits back and goes, man, life is out of control. Man, the drama is real. The circumstances are real, and they're almost overpowering. But in those circumstances, we can learn that God is working and God is moving. You've often heard me talk about my dad and my father, and indeed he is a very powerful and influential person in my life. I do not mean to discredit and shortchange my mother, because she's also incredible in a spiritual presence in my life. When I was in college, a senior in college, that year, my dad's best friend, who I called Uncle Tim, I grew up with him, I was named after him, was stricken with cancer. And the only way he found out he had bone cancer was his leg broke. In other words, he was just walking down the sidewalk one day and his leg literally fell apart. The cancer had eaten his bone that far before he knew he had cancer. And they took him into the hospital, and his leg was broken, and they did some tests and said, you have bone cancer. And he almost died there on the spot. Now, he actually ended up living for an extra 6 or 7 years. But while he was in the hospital, his wife left him and took the kids. He's dying of cancer in the hospital, and the wife said, I'm leaving. And I'm taking the kids with me. And she did, and she left. And I'll never forget, I went and visited him, and while I was in the hospital visiting him, his wife showed up. And here he is in this hospital, he's dying. And we thought he was going to die any day. And we were there visiting him, and my father was there, and this is a man I grew up with. This is a man who I revered, one of my spiritual mentors as well. And he was in agony. He was in such agony. He was in such pain from the broken leg. He was on a morphine drip. He could just press it any time he wanted to get relief. And he was in agony, and the wife comes into the hospital room, doesn't say really hi or how are you doing. She says, where's the checkbook? I need the money. And he, on his deathbed, had to figure out, we could give her the bank account information so that she could have money. And she has said, I'm leaving you, in essence. You talk about drama. You talk about intrigue. And the thing here is that he recovered, but the problem was he couldn't walk. He was essentially sent home with the orders that you're not allowed to move, except bare minimum. And he had to go into a wheelchair, and it was going to take 6 months of recovery. He couldn't hold his job while he had 6 months of recovery. And his wife had left. He was by himself, and essentially he had nobody outside of my father and my mother, who were his best friends. Everybody had left. And he would just, he was a pastor, he was serving in a church, he'd only been there a few months, so nobody really knew him that well to come in and take care of him. And I'll never forget, it was my mother who said, I will take a leave of absence. I will forego my salary, and I will forego taking care of every responsibility I have in Arkansas. I'll move to Illinois, and I will take care of them. And she did for the next 6 months. She moved back to Illinois, left her cerebral palsy-stricken son in Arkansas with my father. My father had to take care of the responsibilities there for the entire household. She moved back and took care of him for the next 6 months and restored him back to health to a point to where eventually he could be back literally on his feet, and then he moved to Arkansas where they could all essentially get back together, and live there for the rest of his life. And he lived with cancer for a good 6 or 7 years after that point. All right, and amazingly met another woman and got married, and it's an incredible story even after the fact. I don't have time to tell the whole story. But my point is, you talk about drama. You talk about the circumstances of this life willing to get you down. But what was it that restored him? What was it that brought him back when he could very easily have given up on that hospital bed? It was the friendship and the devotion that existed from his closest friends. People who had known him since he was in high school. People who had known him all the way through college and followed his life, and who loved him with the kind of love that you can only have for a friend. That is the kind of devotion that is full of drama. That's the narrative of life. We can very easily be overwhelmed with it sometimes, but in truth, it's God's way of saying, I love you. I have given you this drama for a reason, either to teach you or to bless you or to show you how many friends I've given you. If you'll embrace the drama, embrace the soap opera, we can learn a lot about God and how He works. Let us bow our heads in word of prayer. Father, give us the strength and the courage to embrace our drama. May it be a blessing. May we ultimately come to know that you are a God who is pursuing us, using all of these circumstances to your great benefit and to our great benefit. We ask all of this in the name of Jesus. Amen.